Far from the crowded cities, deep in the forest hills, live India's tribal people.
Tribals are not part of the mainstream society. They've been living in the hills, within the forests, for centuries.
These are people who were seen as encroachers on their own land. For decades or centuries, these people were seen as there but should not have been there. Particularly with the advent of the British colonial rule, where the forests and the common lands were all kind of claimed as king's property.
For centuries, people lived here with no claim to the land where they gathered food, planted crops and built their homes. Today, that is changing. Trupti and Amrish Mehta are founding members of the regional non-profit Arch Vahini. They have dedicated their lives to living and working with tribal villages, striving to find a way to help tribal people gain legal rights to the land on which they had been living and working for generations. They have partnered with Barun Mitra, an expert on land and property rights.
In 1800, Britishers wanted to take timber from these forests. All of a sudden, people found out that they are now criminals in their own land, that you cannot go to the forest, you cannot cultivate this land belongs to the state, now the British Empire, like that.
When India gained independence from the British in 1947, the forest lands were taken over by the new government, dashing any hope of the local tribal people owning their traditional lands.
After independence, all these forests become national forests. During 50s and 60s, a lot of tree cutting was done in the forest. And this was done by the forest department as part of the regular forest management. They wanted to convert large tracts of forest into plantations.
Local villagers, desperate to eke out a living, began to cultivate the land illegally, growing food for their families.
Their situation was very bad because they didn't have any legal means of livelihood. Whatever they did to eke out that livelihood, it was considered as criminal. They were considered as thieves in their own land.
Since they had no legal rights, forest department officials would try to evict them and sometimes use that as an extortion mechanism that, unless you pay, we are going to send the bulldozer or send the tractor to uproot your crops.
And so, whenever they started cultivating, they were just evicted by the forest department. And so that was a very burning problem for that.
There were people who were Indians as citizens, but really didn't have the rights of a citizen. So if you were always under the threat that your crop could be uprooted, then you are going to invest the minimum and you want to extract the maximum as quickly as possible. Because you don't know at which moment the guard might come and extort money or actually demolish. In fact, there have been thousands of people whose houses have been demolished. If you can't invest, you can't increase your productivity.
Villagers were fearful to improve their land. So no wells, no tractors, no irrigation. If a forest official was abusive or extorted money, they had nowhere to turn.
By early 2000, the lives of the tribal population in most of India were similar to the poorest of the poor in India.
We came to a couple of villages and we saw their plight. Their situation was just like near starvation. They couldn't get 2 square meals a day. It was not a good situation.
At that time, no one really cared enough to think that there's one category of citizens who are really not enjoying the rights of citizens. And they were too poor, too disorganized to be able to express themselves in a manner that the political society would recognize.
As economic reforms were erupting across the country, tribal communities and their advocates began to organize and speak out, laying claim to the land on which they were living.
People protesting, marching, coming to Delhi. In fact, there was a 1 million men march to Delhi. What dawned on the political establishment was they realized that there is a genuine demand and something has to be done. They didn't suppress it in the way they could have or would have 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or 50 years ago.
In 2006, the national government passed the Forest Rights Act, which included a provision for tribal peoples to gain legal rights to the traditional lands. Rama Bai and his family live in Sagai village in the national forests of Gujarat. Rama is a farmer and a tribal leader in his village.
Gradually, everyone heard the news of the new law which was introduced that land prior to 2005 may be allotted by law.
But there was a catch. In order to gain ownership, villagers had to prove they were farming a specific parcel of land prior to December 31st, 2005.
In situations like these villages, there is no one who's recording who's farming when and how. How would you prove that?
They handed out application forms to everyone. We all had to rush to the government office to apply. There was a large crowd with a long line of people submitting applications. Everyone made a map of their land. We used thread to mark boundaries and measure an area to make the maps.
But the application and hand-drawn maps weren't enough. The government insisted on an official paper trail with a history of government-issued documents proving ownership.
When I applied, our application was declined and we were not given the title to our land. Almost everyone was refused.
After a lengthy review, the government approved only 10% of the applications. It looked like most villages were back where they started. But then they came up with a new idea. What if they could use Google Earth satellite maps to prove that the villages were cultivating specific plots of land prior to 2006?
So the satellite images on Google Earth was one instrument by which we thought it's possible. So what happened was that archival images became available. So in some places we have images from 2002 and 2004, which means that you get a picture of the history. So if in 2005 you see this forest, you know this was a forest. If it was an open field, you can see that on the image. So if you see that boundary, there is no way you can deny that this plot was being farmed. And there was no other way to show it in such a dramatic manner as the satellite images.
10-15 people from each village sat around those images, trying to make heads and tails out of that. But once they got their bearing, they could identify each person's fields on these images.
The next critical step was to create accurate boundary maps that could be superimposed on the satellite imagery. Small handheld GPS units made that possible.
You switch it on, get the satellite signal, walk around the perimeter of the field that you want to map. Transfer it to a computer. You'll be able to see the plot boundary on the image and you'll know where it has gone.
And you see what was the condition of this particular piece of land in, say, if the image is of 2005, whether it was under forest or it was under cultivation. You can easily see.
Now tribal villages had definitive maps to bolster their applications. With the GPS data in hand, nearly 90% of their applications were approved.
This technology has really been a boom. If the law was passed 10, 20 years ago, these technologies didn't exist. So people would have had to struggle to prove and help implement the law. This was a classic example of how society was mobilized, political sensitization took place, the law got enacted, and the technology converged to help facilitate implement the law.
Now they are no longer encroachers. They are no longer criminals. These people are now very confident that now we own this land. And that has snowballed into so many other things.
This is now my land and I'm feeling very happy. I'll plow the land and cultivate it myself. I'll labor hard and never sell it. In the slope part, I plan to grow mango saplings and other forest trees.
Forests that were entirely depleted under the forest department are now being regenerated in the hands of the tribal villages.
Before, the forest department wouldn't allow us to dig a well because we didn't have a title for the land. Now we own it. I started by digging a small well, but now 8 or 9 families are making this well together. We are now digging a bigger well to get more water.
After 10 years, the situation has dramatically changed. Most of the parents now seek to send their children to good schools. So that is the dramatic change. They are spending lots of rupees on the education of girls also.
So now they can even plan for improving it further, make long-term investments and all those things. But the greatest thing which they feel is that now we can live with dignity. We are getting respect. Because now we are no longer encroachers or we are no longer illegal lawbreakers. So when we are cultivating this land, we can cultivate these lands keeping our heads high.
For the first time, they feel as they are true citizens in a democratic country, that they are respected when they go to a government office. They are still poor. Things have not changed here dramatically. You don't see industries or big capital investment. But the sense of pride and dignity is going to last them a lifetime.